I am today reminded of a very dear but late departed friend of mine, Pam Blanford, who taught me as I was growing up the difference between a house and a home. Her hospitality, warmth, concern and openness transformed her house into a home. And today, I find that these past few weeks have done much the same for me, because this impressive, perhaps slightly intimidating building, known as a house, has, thanks to your lordship's welcome, been transformed from a house into a home. This welcome has come even from former ministers opposite, against whom in the past I used to rail and protest. And it came from the noble Lord Ryder, with whom I had the pleasure of working in television some years ago. Their welcome has been paralleled by the enormous attention, kindness and assistance from officers and staff, and I thank all concerned for this. It's also for me a great pleasure to be sitting amongst ex-MPs with whom I worked in the European Parliament, and with former colleagues from my trade union days, including my noble friend Lord Radici, who supported me on my introduction, and who was my very first boss some 40 years ago when I started work at the General and Municipal Workers' Union. Now, my arrival here has reminded me of something that Zena Parker, the then wife of the then MP for Dagenham, said when she looked in the other place in 1945 after the 1945 election, and she exclaimed, "It's just like a Fabian summer school." So many Fabians were elected to that house on that day. And of course I'm particularly reminded by that, sitting here opposite the noble Lord Lord Attlee, whose grandfather led those Fabian MPs with so much distinction. Indeed, I could almost put together a Fabian executive in the House, from 3 former General Secretaries, a host of Fabian chairs, and 2 Fabian treasurers, including the noble Lord Roper. It is therefore a particular pleasure for me to rise in support of a bill standing in the name of another former Fabian treasurer, whom I met 36 years ago, the noble and learned Lord Leicester of Herne Hill. He was already eminent and very learned then, and I simply was young. He remains eminent and even more learned, but somewhere along the line I lost my youth. Of course, I'm sorry to find him on the opposite bench now, because in those days we did sit together, and there is still space here. But the great advantage of him being on the government benches is that he should have far more influence over another Fabian employee, former Fabian employee, the noble Lord McNally.
All coming out.
The end of his political career, who will shortly answer on behalf of the government. I trust he will take Lord Leicester's wise counsel and give this bill a fair wind. My lords, I have known a bit about libel from when I received the first ever writ, almost my first day at the Fabian Society, when I succeeded the late Lord Ponsonby of Shulbreed when he arrived in your lordship's house. That was just the first writ I received. But I have also found my name in Private Eye, Sunday Sport, and various other places in ways to which I certainly objected. So, my lord, as Lord Hoffman has said, there is a delicate balancing act in this area. We need strong protections for the ordinary individual, perhaps vilified for things they never did, the teacher or social worker falsely accused, the victim of crime or mishap who somehow becomes the story or even the target for revenge, the unwilling bystander caught up in someone else's fight. Indeed, as chair of the Legal Services Consumer Panel, and not an interest particularly declarable, as defamation is somewhat outside our bailiwick, but as chair of the Legal Services Consumer Panel, I constantly champion the interests of those who need, but are often denied, access to justice. We must protect the ability of those unfairly pilloried in the press to to have legal means to pursue a claim. But the other side of the balance is the need for free speech. Not unfettered, irresponsible free speech, but as citizens we have the right to hear those campaigning on our behalf, particularly against the self-interests of large, powerful, or well-organized vested interests, which of course can also include the state itself. When I was the chief executive of Alcohol Concern, I was once threatened by a writ by one of the country's largest brewers over the most trivial and nonsensical of issues. But it was a warning. My lords, I believe in that old adage that sunshine is the best disinfectant. And that sunshine is often brought to us by campaigners and journalists who can use their talents, the freedom of information provisions, research and knowledge to raise public issues on our behalf, whether about food or drug safety, medicine, professional practices, planning, or other vital decisions taken behind closed doors, often by the rich or powerful. Citizens have the right to be well informed on matters of public interest, public health, and public good, and to be kept abreast of ideas and information generated on all of these. Rarely is the law court the right venue for such debate. Scientific discourse should take place in academic journals and seminars, not in our courts, unless well-defined barriers are crossed. Let me give just one example of where the threat of legal action nearly diminished our access to information. And I speak as the doting grandmother of Poppy and Isaac. Too young to be with us today, so young enough to be in need of safe, reliable, and tested child car seats. As the House will know, the brilliant and highly reliable Consumers Association, or which, campaigns on our behalf over a wide range of goods and services. 2 years ago, which published its annual child car seat report, which included some don't buy recommendations, vital for every young family to know, which were promptly threatened by the manufacturers with being sued for libel and malicious falsehoods unless they completely retracted. Luckily for parents, which refused, knowing the robustness of its research, but also confident of its reputation. But a year of correspondence, time, and money were used up, which had better things to do with that effort, and we as consumers would otherwise have been denied our right to know what is best for young passengers. The problem is that the very threat of libel action from a large vested interest can silence public discourse. Citizens' representatives can censor themselves for fear of a libel action, as the legal costs could bankrupt the individual or their organisation. That means we, as consumers of information and ideas, cannot hear what we need for our own democracy and well-being. It is, my lords, for exactly such issues and to prevent such mischief that your, or maybe now I can say our House, is so well suited. Our present libel laws are not fit for purpose, and we have the chance to change this. We want to defend the right to protect an individual's reputation from slander, innuendo, and defamation. But there has to be a better balance between this and the public's right to good and greater information and opinion. This bill, ably put together by the noble and learned Lord Leicester, seeks to do just that. I urge the Minister to take heed of his wise counsel under the demands of British Pen, Sense About Science, which the medical colleges, and to give this bill a very fair and speedy wind, and to help open up the secrets of decision makers and corporate interests for the sake of all our citizens. Yeah.